Thank you for being present with us here today and for attending session number 5 entitled Gulf Security in Light of Regional Conflicts. I think that many of you participated in previous sessions that were consecrated for security in the Gulf region. And as you heard from previous sessions and coming sessions, this is an axis that is not only important but that is also very complex from all aspects and dimensions. This session here today will be focusing on the security in the Arab Gulf in light of regional conflicts. My name is Abdullah Baabood, and I will try as much as possible to be managing and chairing this session. There are people observing me and appreciating how I would be managing this session. There are 3 important topics that will be discussed and 3 different experts who will be talking about these different topics. Professor Mohammed Al-Misfer, he will be the first speaker, and he will be talking about the GCC Council and its lost role. Later on, and according to the program, Mr. Makki will also take the floor. Of course, you all know him, and he will be talking about the political change in Iraq and how it affects collective security in the Gulf. And afterwards, Professor Ali Al-Dhahab will be taking the floor, and he will be talking about the Arab coalition in the US-Iranian crisis. I can read their biography. However, in order to gain more time, let's start directly, because you can find their biography in the program. So let's gain time and I think that we'll start directly. Each of the speakers has 20 minutes. Let's start with Mr. Mohammed. In the name of Allah, the most gracious, the most merciful. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First and foremost, I would like to say that the title of my intervention is related to the future of the GCC, the role of the GCC and its future. Maybe there was a mistake that was made. In all cases, ladies and gentlemen, I will not be talking about the strategic importance of the Arab Gulf. This goes back to 350 years before Christ. And it had this important strategic importance. And I will not be talking about the GCC Council and its achievements, and I will not be talking about its failures. However, I will be talking about the pain of the GCC member states, these countries that are part of the Gulf Cooperation Council. The GCC Council was established because of regional and international crisis that erupted in the year 1981. And many events were happening. The visit of Sadat to Israel in 1977 that created tension in the city, in the region, and the fact that Egypt went out of the League of Arab States in the 1978, in addition to the Iranian Revolution and overthrowing of the regime at the end of the year 1979, the Soviet and their entering of Afghanistan on 25th of December of the year 1979, the unrest in the southern part of Yemen, and the execution of the Yemeni President Salem Rabia Ali, the internal war in the year 1978 in Yemen, which led to executing the president The Soviets were in a race with other forces in what concerns imposing hegemony, and we can also talk about other events like the eruption of the Iraqi-Iranian war in 1980, the occupation of the Grand Mosque by armed men, and this was considered the event that led to the closure of the Grand Mosque. I would like to divide this presentation into 5 different topics. Maybe if I take 5 extra minutes, I don't think that this will create a problem. First, I'll be talking about security internally, externally, and structurally. Second, I'll be talking about economic issues. Third, about political issues. Fourth, demographic issues. And fifth, the future of the GCC Council. First, and in what concerns the security level, Sheikh Zayed, may God or Allah bless his soul, when he was talking with Margaret Thatcher, the former Prime Minister of Britain, he said that the security of the Gulf is the responsibility of its sons only, and that our friends are far away until we require their presence during crises. However, we are the ones who should take care of that. Sheikh Sabah Aydam talked about the importance of the GCC Council. King Fahd also said that the responsibility of the Gulf is the responsibility of our sons and daughters, and we are able to protect the region in the 1980s. So, what about the external challenges and risks? I would like to talk now about the external challenges. So we talked a lot about the causes that led to the establishment of the GCC Council, and as we said earlier, they constitute sources of fear of the GCC Council, and this led to the necessity of establishing a political entity that gathers Gulf countries that follow a certain political regime or system, the hereditary central system, as we all know. And the fears grew more and more, and therefore later on they created what was called a force to really be able this force that was called the Peninsula Shield Force, and we also noticed that this shield did lots of mistakes because they did not agree on its leadership, they did not agree on how to perform in it and on the doctrine of this force, and therefore this force was only a force without any missions, and it faced 3 different cases. The first case was the Second Gulf War, the occupation of Kuwait, and it did not have any effective role despite the fact that it could have done so. It could have done so, and there was a force beforehand, a force between Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Egypt, and both were able beforehand to stop the Iraqis in an intentional manner, in a determined manner. However, the Peninsula Shield Force faced. The Gulf political elite think that everything related to the security in the Gulf is dependent on America, and therefore we can say that the American military presence increased in the region, because in every Gulf state there is at least one base, and this is applicable to all Gulf countries, and we can say that this is something that expanded in the region. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia required from the American administration lately to send a military force, and it required also a strong maritime force, and as the American president says, So that they are coming in order to protect the Gulf countries, and this means that the American force is like a force that can be rented by everyone in certain crises. I would like to remind you that when in the 70s, the UAE asked Britain to stay, and Dennis Halley, the Minister of Defense, said that the army of Britain will not be an army that can be rented, and we will not take this position. However, we see now how the American army is to be found everywhere. There's also another element that is very important, and that is related to the external challenges. It is the race or the competition between Russia and America in the region, in the absence of a Gulf strategy that might be unified in order to contain this competition. In addition to this, India is considered also as a force that plays an important role. And there's no doubt that it will challenge the security of the region. Pakistan as well is a nuclear force. Pakistan and Iran is looking at this choice, and we are hearing a lot now in the Gulf that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia wants to form a nuclear shield armament, and we saw how the response was by certain Gulf countries. So India constitutes a big danger that we might not realize at this time. It has 7 million to 8 million people in this region. The Indian ambassador in Bahrain said in an open discussion that we have a force in this region, because in every house you can find an Indian in the Gulf, an Indian hat and an Indian foot. So we have around 8 million Indians here in the region. So we are talking about also this fact later on. I would like to remind you that Singapore was separated from Malaysia and was given to Chinese migrants. In what concerns PG, it was controlled by Indian migrants, and now we can say that the percentage is at 50%. So in the Gulf today, of migrants reach between 2 and 10%. Yesterday, Mr. Al-Hashimi was talking and saying no talk about the internal challenges. So let's start with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Lots of operations so releasing the security of the kingdom, like what happened on the 4th of July of the year 2016, bombings, and then at the same day there were other attacks. One of them targeted the American consulate in Jeddah, and another incident also destabilized the security authorities or parties were able to stop a terrorist operation that targeted the city of King Abdullah in Jeddah. So, of course, there were many people who also were arrested, and it was considered that they were corrupt, and later on many other people also were arrested. Those people who are considered among the biggest intellects of the Saudi government or of the Saudi.
What about Kuwait? Since the American-British occupation of Iraq in the year 2003, Kuwait has been witnessing a lot of security crises, like the assassination of an American in the year 2003, and another one also was injured, actually, and because of an attack by someone who is not known. In February of the same year, also there is another helicopter destroyed. In what concerns Bahrain, in the year 2011, there is a popular movement that was launched, and it had different names, and it was requesting political reform. And different confrontations happened between the protesters peacefully.
The government of Bahrain issued a statement. It was supported by Saudi. The statement listed a number of terrorist groups that were accused of seeking to destabilize the regime. I will not delve into this issue. The same situation applies to the UAE. The UAE is also the scene of a number of conflicts. Around 70 people were arrested. They continue to be detained and imprisoned. Some were tried. In Oman in 2005, the Omani authorities arrested a number of Omani young men who are from the Abadi sect. This came after against the backdrop of the US attack on the region, the 9/11 attacks. 30 people were indicted of them. They were accused of seeking to prepare for a putsch, for a coup against the regime in place. So they were accused of seeking to effect military change in order to establish an imamate rule. What are the other security, intra-security threats for Oman and the UAE? There have been 18 spying operations from the UAE in Oman. The spies were arrested, and also the Sea of Oman was named as the East Oman. There was also military presence in Makki on the border with Oman. This is a threat to the region. This is not to mention Hadramaut. In addition, Oman granted its citizenship to a number of political leaders in Maghreb and Hadramaut in reference to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. This is also not to mention the military presence in around 14 military points in the UAE and in Saudi Arabia. So this military presence, in addition to a US military base that could pose a threat. I also mentioned the East Sea. The Al-Maghreb province could be the scene of the next conflict between Oman and the UAE on the one hand, Saudi Arabia and Oman on the other hand. The relations between Saudi Arabia and Qatar are now at their worst, despite expectations of a detente. I believe this is still far-fetched because of the different perceptions and the perception of superiority and inferiority. The Saudi-Qatari relations are at their worst. The same applies to the relation between Saudi Arabia and Kuwait. They are not at their best. They have a dispute in Yemen over the desert, and also a dispute over the border and identity. Economy is another bone of contention. You know, there is a higher council. The economic issues include a joint economic agreement, economic citizenship, a free trade agreement, a customs union. Those remain with on paper. Demographic composition, we know that to another we have a rate of 2 to 10 or 3 to 10, but we have always a ratio of less than 5 to 10 at the demographic level. But unfortunately we do not really know how to overcome this demographic crisis. In my opinion, to be able to overcome this crisis, really the country should start investing in their people, so that we do not turn once again into another Fiji or into what I have previously explained. So for those who call for a solution to this demographic. Some believe that we do not need infrastructure. Some speak against infrastructure. They don't want more buildings and more concrete, and they believe that we should stay away from this. I believe that we are no different than Germany or the UAE or any other country that is granting citizenship to huge number of people. Finally, in conclusion, there are a number of real estate projects. This is a dilemma. You go on a drive of real estate projects, and then you ask non-Arabs, you ask foreigners to come, you provide them with the right to permanent stay and residence, and they come to occupy and to populate these projects. According to some of the studies, there are up to 5 million people who will live in the region in the next 5 or 10 years, and this will lead to a great demographic imbalance, and we should be aware of this consequence. In conclusion, based on my previous presentations, so we can reach the following conclusions. At the security level, the GCC countries will remain to be affected by the fluctuations and volatilities in a number of countries, including the US, and as we have already said, Mr. Sage said yesterday the US is not trustworthy and reliable, and we can no longer rely on the US to maintain our security. This is not possible because the US has disentangled itself, and we know that our leaders have shifted the responsibility of our security to other parties who can manipulate the situation. In addition, GCC countries do not have one perception of the Gulf, and they do not know also who is the enemy. They do not agree on the enemy. The political leaders continue to compete amongst themselves, jealousy, and they have different ambitions as well, and this is likely to affect the track. Economically, the economic agreement of 1981 was not fully implemented, and therefore all the projects have failed except for, and all of these projects are illusory. Bilateral cooperation among GCC countries is a new phenomenon. The UAE and Saudi Arabia signed an agreement. This is the trend now, and also such bilateral agreements are temporary because the current crisis, we have heard of the countries that were seized and confiscated based on a geographical map, and this almost led to a military confrontation and escalation. In my opinion, I do not see any future for the GCC. I've already said that in 1982 in a media article that was published by the Gulf newspaper in Sharjah, and I said that the current composition does not bode well for the GCC. I said the GCC does not have a security and economic identity. It only relies on the oil wealth, and I said that we do not have a presence because we do not have the demographics, and I said that the GCC Council only relies on Iraq and Yemen, and now with Iraq out of the picture, there is Jordan, and now we continue to rely on Iraq, and Iraq should join again. Thank you for your kind attention. Thank you, Mr. Mohammed, for your of the security situation.
وأيضا للعديد من التهديدات الأمنية التي تطرق لها الأستاذ في ورقته، وأكيد أيضا هذا لها علاقة بما سمعتوه من الأمس وأيضا في جلسات صباح اليوم.
Yesterday and also this morning,
هذه المواضيع. محمد على التزامك بالوقت، ونطلب أيضا من الأستاذ لقاء مكي أن يلتزم بنفس الوقت ويحدثنا عن موضوع السياسية في العراق وما يحصل في العراق
Iraq and the developments in Iraq and how they affect security in the Gulf. Thank you, Chair.
طبعا هذا التكليف هذا المؤتمر
Of course, this forum has been planned for 4 months. And this was before the current developments in Iraq. As you know, the current developments represent a major variable in the Iraqi landscape. At the outset, there are a number of constants that I should first address. First of all, Iraq is part of an umbrella, or is part of a triangle that dominates the security aspect or the geostrategic aspect in the Gulf. This includes Iran and Saudi Arabia as well. As you know, they have the advantage in terms of the historical power, geographics, and demographics. This umbrella had a balancing effect despite the different polarizations and despite the different changes. This has been the case since the 70s when Britain pulled out from the Gulf. The British withdrawal led to a vacuum. In the early 70s, Iraq was then a progressive state trying to counter the regressive states of the Gulf. So there was a tug of war, but these political changes remained, and the Shah was then in power, and he was closer to the pro-Britain Gulf states. At that time, Iraq stepped in Oman. Iraq also had very bad relations at that time with Saudi Arabia. The ideological difference between the two parties did not lead to fighting. Why? Because there were foreign military presence in the region, and also this was related to the nature of political relations. At that time, the scene was not conducive to internecine fighting. At that time also, Iran was a threat to Iraq from the security and military perspective. And that's why even in 1973, when the October War erupted, Iraq wanted to join the war. Iraq dispatched troops, but before that it sought a settlement with Iran under which it would withdraw its border troops towards Syria, and this is what happened. A truce was reached with Iran under Shah. It pulled out troops from the border and also from northern Iraq where the Kurds were rebelling, and this happened with Iran's support. This sharp polarization in the relations is linked to a few incidents. As I've already mentioned, the first incident was the British withdrawal. The second development was the Iranian Islamic Revolution of 1979. This revolution led to major transformations, and the effects of these transformations continue in the region. The revolution spilled over and had a global effect as well, with the Islamization and with the spread of Islamist movements after the revolution. The Islamic Revolution has changed Iran's relations with the Gulf, and we have all heard of the concept of exporting the revolution. In the early Iranian statements, for instance, there was talk about Bahrain being a part of Iran and also Iraq being part of Iran. So at that time, there was a talk about this protective or production system. This was a variable in the relationship between Iraq and Gulf states. Both parties felt that they were facing one threat. The relations between the two sides improved significantly. Security coordination began. Of course, the Iran-Iraq war was a third major variable. The war lasted 8 years, and we all know what happened. The Gulf countries supported Iraq at that time. Almost all Gulf countries stood by Iraq, particularly Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and the UAE. They supported Iraq. They provided Iraq with financial support. Of course, there was also high-level cooperation amongst different parties to counter Iran. After the conclusion of the war, the fourth major variable came in, which is the invasion of Kuwait. As a result of this invasion, Iraq was again perceived as a serious and existential threat for the countries of the Gulf. The liberation of Kuwait started. Iraq took a retreat and came under embargo. Iraq became a weak state. This was another variable. I have given this historical overview. So Iraq was weak before it was a strong state. A strong Iraq invaded Kuwait. It left Kuwait. It was besieged. It became a weak country in 2003. Another important variable came, which is the invasion of Iraq. After Iraq's invasion, the United States entered into the region as an occupying force. The U.S. presence in Iraq turned all Arab Gulf countries, changed all Arab countries' perception, and they shied away from seeking U.S. intervention. The U.S. presence in Iraq changed the Gulf perception of Iraq. The U.S. was there. And after all, Iraq and the U.S. and Gulf countries were allies, so they said that Iraq will not be an enemy or an opponent of the Gulf. I believe that this perception was not totally accurate because the interests of countries change and are affected by geography and political parameters. Of course, Iraq will not disappear all of a sudden. It's a country, it will exist, and it will continue to exist also. At the end of the day, I believe that there should have been a better preparation for the future, and the situation in Iraq should have been realigned in such a way that would maintain the stability of Gulf countries. So Gulf countries adopted a negative approach towards Iraq at that time. However, Iran adopted a more positive approach towards Iraq. Iran developed its influence in Iraq even before the invasion. We know that Zarif, as representative of Iran in the UN, met with an Iraqi official, and they agreed that Iran would turn a blind eye to some aggressions and so on. This is included in Khalil Zad's book, and also Iran in a way assisted the US in maintaining political stability by supporting the formation of an Iraqi government that was formed with the support of Iran. Of course, the US welcomed Iran's support also, although the government was pro-Iran and the political process altogether favored Iran. The US allowed Iran to gain influence and clout in Iran in return for protecting its interests. This happened during the two Bush terms and also during the Obama mandate. Iran was working in Iraq with the U.S. knowledge. After Trump came in, there was a minor shift, a minor change. But back then, Iran had already entrenched its clout in Iraq. Now we have a vertical line or a horizontal line because Iran controls Iraq both at the security and strategic levels, at least for the time being. On the other hand, there is Saudi Arabia and the Gulf countries. There was also a series of Iran's neighbors from east to the west, and now we can also add the southern neighbor, which is Yemen. And now we can talk about a direct Iranian threat to the Gulf. The geostrategic landscape has significantly changed in the region. This was brought about through a series of events that happened in the 90s at the time of the Iranian-Saudi rapprochement. This did not encourage Saudi Arabia and Gulf countries to build a true strong security system, including through internal cooperation. This ended with the blockade on Qatar, of course, and now there is an increasing polarization, particularly between Qatar and the blockade countries. As I have already said, there was a direct correlation between a pro-Iran Iraq, and this is the case. Actually, this is how we can describe Iraq. The US influence in Iraq is weak, is insignificant, and cannot be influential, and the US could not control the Iraqi foreign policy and security policy, and this remains the case. Meanwhile, Iran has clout and political and security influence, especially after the formation of the popular mobilization groups and after the war with Daesh. This geostrategic shift in the region could have made the Arab Gulf countries aware of the risks. They are aware now of the risk, but they can do nothing about it. They could not do anything about it. Gulf countries, for instance, Saudi Arabia, they tried to establish relations within Iraq by meeting with some Iraqi Shia figures, such as Sayyid Muqtada Sadr. And also Saudi Arabia tried to establish a relationship with Ammar al-Hakim and with others. And actually Saudi Arabia tried to focus on Shia clerics and not on Sunni religious leaders. We know that Iran's relations with the Sunni community is much better than Saudi Arabia's relationship with the Sunnis, because Saudi Arabia focused on relations with the Shia community. So we know also about the tribal element in Iraq. Saudi Arabia, in particular, tried to intervene after 2016. Sabhan was Saudi's first ambassador to Baghdad. He tried to establish relations, and of course he left Iraq. Another ambassador was appointed. I think he was Shanbari. I think he was closer to the tribes. He also tried to follow in his predecessor's footsteps. So this rapprochement with the southern sheikhs and the clerics was not influential. The financial assistance also, $10 billion were given to satellites run by Ammar Hakim, i.e. Al-Furat satellite channel, and money was not given to Sunni satellites. So what impact does this polarization have? It's hard to tell. It's hard to measure the effect, but we know that this was inconsequential. When you want to build any future strategic role, you should lay the foundation, and this was not the case. When you come late to the game, you have to bear more cost, and the results are not always guaranteed. This is what happened with the Gulf countries. Now, this is the strategic landscape in Iraq. Last October, a protest movement began. It soon evolved into a revolution in Iraq.
This movement raised a number of slogans, including expelling Iran from Iraq. Protesters in Najaf and Karbala, and you all know how significant these two cities are for the Shia community. The Iranian consulate was set on fire in both cities, and 4 times in Najaf. So this was a key indication about a major turnaround in Iraq. This turnaround could be ascribed to a number of reasons. 16 years after the occupation, corruption was rampant. And here I'm not only talking about financial corruption, it's also political corruption, and the corruption became rampant and pervasive, and also the US has a direct responsibility. The economic corruption started with the United States. Iran is not the only party to be blamed. The economic corruption started with Bremer, and when Iran also inherited Iraq after the US withdrawal from Iraq, Iraq also resorted to corrupt figures, because corrupt figures can steal also, because if you go to clean-handed people, they will not be able to counter the agents and the spies. So that's why Iran opted for corrupt figures as well, and this has nothing to do with religion, and the sectarian aspect was not a factor that came into play. We know that some Sunnis are now closer to Iran than the Shia, and there are many Shia who are hostile to any foreign intervention in Iraq, and they are very patriotic, but they are not corrupt, and they are excluded, and they are not part of the power establishment. So corruption was destructive and led to the state's collapse and to the collapse of the institutions. Services collapsed, and also ethics collapsed. This led to the current uprising in the streets of Iraq, particularly in the south and in Baghdad. This variable is important and begets a different future for Iraq, regardless of how this revolution will end. It could end now. It could it could be extended. The parliament may change. There may be a different major transformation in Iraq, a major regime change. Actually, you should know that the regime in Iraq is similar to the establishment in Lebanon, and in both countries, it's very hard to talk about a zero-sum revolution, because we are talking about an octopus-like establishment, and it's not easy to effect regime change. And in such a change, the revolution is difficult, but the counter-revolution is even more difficult. Just as the revolution is a long-term one, the counter-revolution could be even impossible, and it's difficult, because what happened 2 days ago, the attack on Khilani, when 24 people killed, could have evolved had this been a direct attempt to end the revolution. So the establishment does not accept and tolerate a counter-revolution. This led to an imbalance, to a fighting. Both parties fought, and the movement ended. So what I'm trying to say, there is no well-knit political or security regime or system that can be overhauled. Accordingly, there will be major variables, and we should be aware of this. Will Iraq be democratic and stable? Very possible. Again, I would like to link this to the Gulf. The Gulf tried a strong Iraq, and this was tiring. The Gulf tried a weak Iraq. This was also tiring. And now we have an opportunity of a strong and stable Iraq. Will this work? Will this also be exhausting? And democratic Iraq is important also. Will Iraq be stable and not detrimental to the interest of the other countries? But importantly, will it be democratic Iraq? And will such an Iraq be a destabilizing factor for the Gulf countries, or will it be a stabilizing factor? I know that in some countries it may take years for democracy to ripen. This depends, of course, on the social and political systems in place. But what I'm trying to say, one last comment, movement in Iraq is a social movement par excellence. It's a dangerous social movement. It includes rebellion against the ruling and tribal establishment, and it's also a rebellion against the family. Many left their families to take to the streets. This is very significant in the south, where the tribes are more coherent than in central Iraq, where the Shia outnumber the Sunni, and where the Shia ruling religious establishment is stronger than the Sunni establishment. So what I'm trying to say is that the victims are from both sides. So what I'm trying to say is that in the south, in particular, the movement is violent because we are seeing a departure from the tribal base. This rebellion against the conventional and traditional ruling establishment is per se a social revolution. It also entails religious variables that will affect the control of the religious establishment. Will Iraq turn into a civil state? Yes, this is very likely. We are talking about the ICT revolution, and the revolutions now can take less time to develop. There are very momentous variables, and the Gulf countries should follow these variables closely, because they will definitely affect the Gulf.
Thank you very much, Professor Liqa, for this very detailed explanation of the situation in Iraq. And as we heard from Mr. Mohammed, the challenges are internal, are external. At all times, the challenges are increasing day after day, and this is what's been happening since the 70s and until today. There's also a new challenge that the GCC is facing. It's related to Yemen. So now we would like to give the floor to Professor Ali Al-Dhahab. He'll be talking about the Arab coalition in the US-Iranian crisis. First and foremost, I would like to extend my deepest thanks and appreciation to the Arab Center for Research and Policy Studies, and I would like to thank the chairman of the session, Abdullah Baabood. And I would like to also thank all participants in this session. I'll be talking about the security of the Gulf and the Arab coalition. So we'll be talking about how this coalition started, and we'll be talking about the different implications and scenarios that this coalition might face in addition to the war in Yemen. So I divided these ideas into different parts, and there are many slides. So as you can see before you, we'll be talking about the parties of the coalition. They are known, of course, but we would like to clarify that there are external parties that were first 9 main countries: Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, and Jordan, Morocco, and Sudan. Of course, Oman was not part of it because it stayed neutral and did not participate in this coalition. However, it plays a role that is neutral in what concerns this Arab coalition, especially that its vital interests are starting to be affected. There are also parties that help, like the USA, Britain, and France. They help at the logistical level, military level, and intelligence level, and it has representatives in what concerns the management of operation in Riyadh. There are internal parties to the coalition. Of course, the coalition that is facing the Houthis. This is the Arab coalition that I'm talking about. The Arab coalition that faced different periods of time. Regarding the internal parties, first and foremost, they were represented by the legal authority. However, the coalition is seeking to return this legitimate force, and now there is a Southern Transitional Council that has a separatist strand, and there are also other forces that represent the movement of the General Popular Conference, and they are located in one region. Of course, in addition to other parties in the war that might not be very efficient, but they participated in it, like Al-Qaeda. They might be found in regions of Al-Bayda that are not under the control of the Houthis and not under the control of the Arab coalition. Of course, we'll be focusing on the participation of Gulf countries. The participation mainly was from KSA and UAE, and this participation was the participation through the different types of forces, and of course we can say that the KSA supported the legitimate government, and the UAE is combating using its forces and other militias that it brought from outside, so mercenaries who really helped the opposition forces in the south in order to destroy Ansarullah in the first half of the year 2015. In what concerns Kuwait, it participated also from the different types of forces, and Bahrain also participated through a ship called Al-Subha, and it used to take care of the maritime blockade and participating in the maritime blockade. In addition to this, it has an artillery group that is also to be found in certain regions of Yemen. And what's important to say is that they have experience in what concerns artillery during war. Qatar participated in June 2017, and then it was expelled or removed because of the problems that were incited by its position, and it used its different planes, and it contributed by 10 planes. Bahrain, we talked about this. Oman did not participate, as we said earlier, directly. However, it participated and played a neutral role, and as we said earlier, what happens in Al-Mahra province is the fact that some forces are incited, and the Saudi and American presence in this region and area constituted a source of worry to the Oman national security, and also incited different fears, and later on the Emirati presence in this region decreased when Oman expressed its worry, especially that there were other security files that were opened regarding the espionage that was targeting Oman. I would like to talk a little bit also about the role of Egypt. So Egypt also participated on the aerial level and still participating on the maritime level in what concerns the blockade. Somalia also participated in preparing the airports, Djibouti as well, in what concerns maritime inspection of ships in the framework of the blockade. We would like to talk about the different motives. So we said that earlier the objective was to support the legal and legitimate authority. However, there are other motives that were made clear. So among these different motives, we can talk about what Yemen represents on the geostrategic and geopolitical level. Some look at Yemen as a poor country. What can it provide, and how can it influence us? If we look at the map, Yemen is on the road of the flux or influx of oil, and UAE and the KSA have interests around the Bab el-Mandeb Strait and other areas as well, and therefore for Yemen as well, it is considered as one of the biggest countries after Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and we're talking about the geographical space, and we're talking about the fact that it is close to the Red Sea, to Bab el-Mandeb. It is linked to the Horn of Africa, whether on the political level or the geographical level. And in addition to this, there is another dimension. The Houthis, of course, overthrew the authorities, and there are efforts to contain the forces of the 11th of February, and therefore we hear the Emiratis say that their objective in general is to really eliminate the Houthis because they are considered as an Iranian wing. And all those who are helping them out. So what about the dimensions of this intervention? We said that there are certain special aspects. Of course, there was a distribution of the what we gained, the gains of the war between UAE and KSA, because they are considered as the two motives, militarily and politically. There's also another participating country with UAE and KSA. However, it is far away from the gains. It is Sudan, and it participates with 10,000 soldiers that are dispersed whether in the north or the south or other parts of Yemen. So the main reason first was to support the legal authority. However, this changed later on, and now they are focusing on frustrating and stopping, or actually keeping the leadership of the authority and the legitimate authority outside of the country. And the Houthis, of course, with the support of Iran, put an end to the gap regarding targeting military bases through different types of tools that were made available to them, or through Hezbollah or through any other groups with whom they are allies. In addition to this, the coalition is supporting certain political entities, and some of them are represented by the Southern Council. It has military or administrative institutions that manage the South as well. And we heard in last August how it was able to impose hegemony and to control militarily the province of Aden and Lahsa and then Al-Dhahab. And in addition to this, it sought to really reach the objectives with the support of the United Arab Emirates that really distributed 500 vehicles. And then there's the conference of Riyadh that was hosted in order to praise this step, and this rebel transformed into a partner in the authority. In addition to this, there are other things to be taken into account, like stopping the confrontations and the combat in different fronts that there are in certain regions the confrontations, like in Al-Hudaydah, where the combat operations ended, and the Houthis, when the combat operations stopped, thanks to the Stockholm Agreement in 2018, were able to transform this port into a supporter of their economy, and they started imposing their legitimacy and saying that they are the strongest on the ground. There are also other indicators, like the fact that the military operations are only centered in regions that serve, or actually do not serve anyone except for the Arab coalition. Al-Mahra, for example, in Al-Mahra there are no Houthis, and 24 to 26 barracks were found is this region, and there was also an American presence in order to say that they were not the only ones in this area. There are combat operations in Sada and Hajra as well, and these regions are a way in order to guarantee secure borders between Saudi Arabia and Yemen for future political settlements without being close to the capital Sana'a. There is also a military hegemony of the coalition on the coastal areas. The military presence of the coalition is centered in the Gulf or coastal areas from Mahra to Al-Hudaydah, and this military presence was Emirati, and then there was a redistribution of roles, and other parties came and took care of this militarily. So this map before you shows the big circles actually on the map show the external forces: green Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, red United Arab Emirates. In what concerns the black circles, they indicate the Sudanese forces. So as you can see, the Sudanese forces are dispersed in Aden and on the western coast, on the borders with the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, to the west in Al-Asir, in Jazan. Regarding the Emirati forces, it is dispersed in Al-Mukhalla, in Balha, and these are port regions. And in addition to this, there is a common presence of KSA also in Ma'rib. So you can see on the map also the space that is considered legitimate. However, they do not have a whole presence on these territories. And there are also indicators of the presence of the Houthis, and also common forces supported by the UAE. Orange is represented or representing the Transitional Council, and there are also forces who are under the control of the coalition and managed by the United Arab Emirates. What about the security implications of the performance of the coalition on the security of the Gulf? Of course, the fact that the war is being managed in a directed manner to serve the Arab coalition led to these results. Like, for example, the circle of war was expanded and started englobing the Saudi and the Emirati dimension, despite the fact that it was expected from the Arab coalition to end its operations within 6 months. You can see that the small blocks shows how missile attacks increased from November 2017 till May 2018, and the big blocks also on this slide show the increase of missile attacks against the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia since the beginning of the war in the year 2015. Of course, it's also important to say that the maritime assets of the Arab coalition are now facing a lot of challenges, and this is part of the national security because it is energy security, or because maritime security also constitutes part of the national security in these countries. So there's the ship of Tarabah that was also targeted, and there are also 4 Emirati ships, and I think Emirati and Danish ships that were facing lots of difficulties, and the stations of Khuraik were also targeted. Production also of Aramco, the production also was decreased, and Qatar faced and witnessed a blockade. And this had lots of other impacts on other fields, and there were fears as well regarding what this might have as an effect on the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and there is a race of armament between the GCC member states. This happened during the war. Some arms and weapons reached the military treasury, if I may say, and others are still related to the negotiations. You can see also the remaining weapons that the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia received. There are negotiations on S-400. There are arms at the value of 5 billion regarding the UAE. In what concerns Oman or the Sultanate of Oman, also it updated its arsenal and paid around $836 million to get the F-16. There are 2 scenarios of the scenarios, and if we look at these 2 scenarios, there are 2 different arguments to put an end to the war. Let's say that this Arab coalition stays strong. Of course, there should be a consensus between KSA and the United Arab Emirates. After the Riyadh agreement, the KSA forces came to replace the UAE forces in Aden, in Al-Mukalla, in Shabwa, in certain other regions, and there are mutual visits. The visit between the UAE and between the KSA, and the Sudanese position also is very clear towards the war. It will not withdraw its forces of 10,000 people. There is continuity of economic and political stability in Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the UAE. In the light of all of the aforementioned, we can say that we can turn the page of the Yemeni crisis through a political settlement or have recourse to a military choice within 5 years. However, I do believe that this military alternative or military choice is now not possible, and therefore we propose to really turn the page of the crisis in certain conditions, because the Houthis refuse to have recourse to the political settlement under the rule of the 3 pillars: the Gulf Initiative, the outputs of the national dialogue, the Security Council resolutions, the resolutions of the Conference of Riyadh that focused on the Yemeni unity. What about the other scenario, which is related to the deterioration of the Arab coalition? Of course, here we should take other cases into consideration, other arguments and possibilities into consideration that might lead to this. Like, for example, the fact that the structure of the Arab coalition might be affected negatively, and this might lead to the deterioration of the Arab coalition. And there is the scenario to end the war in this framework, when all of the parties inside Yemen seek to really control the regime or the authority, and we do believe here that the military option would be the best option, and the other option would be the option of a political settlement. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor Ali Al-Dhahab, for this intervention and valuable paper. And I think that we listened to 3 very interesting interventions that focused on the internal crisis of the GCC, in addition to external crises of the GCC Council, and how these affect the region. We talked about Iraq and Yemen. Of course, there are other regions as well that might affect the region. However, in this session, this is what we focused on. Of course, I do believe that you might have lots of questions, and therefore we would like to open the floor for the Q&A session. However, before we do that, I would like to seize the opportunity of me being the chairman of this session now, and I would like to just raise general questions that might help you. Like, for example, can we say that the GCC Council still has a future, as Mr. Mohammed said, and if it does not have any future, what is the alternative? And might there be any cooperation between the GCC countries on different levels, economic, political, social, and so on, amid the nature of some regimes and systems that are found in the region? I think that these questions are worth thinking of. And also, do we believe that Gulf countries will be happy, will face stability? And could we see a free, democratic, and stable Iraq? Is this what the Gulf countries want? And I would also like to add the following. Do Gulf countries want a unified Yemen, a stable Yemen, a democratic Yemen? And is this what the Gulf countries are seeking to achieve, or the Gulf countries are the ones against this? So these are general questions only, and every time I'll be listening to 3 questions, and please just say your names before you ask your question, and let the questions be concise and precise. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Abdullah Al-Yassiri from the University of Kuwait. The first question is addressed to Professor Mohammed. We were very happy to hear your analysis, and you talked about the crises or the problems on the level of the GCC Council, but you talked about 5 countries, but there's a 6th country that you did not mention. Is this a technical problem, or is this another intentional problem? There's another a question that I would like to ask to Mr. Liqa. I was very happy to hear your analysis. I have 3 short and concise questions. In what concerns international relations and political studies, there is something that is called the national personality, the Iraqi national personality. It's known for its force, for its strength. So how could you explain the current events in Iraq amid the presence of this historical personality? Something else, you also talked about neighboring countries and their role in Iraq. How do you analyze the role of Israel since the political change in the year 2003? And the last question is the following. You want a democratic Iraq. You want for the GCC to accept the Iraq to be democratic. We're talking about dreams, about imaginations. GCC countries do not want for Iraq to be democratic. Maybe they do want this. I don't know. Maybe Kuwait is the only state that would accept it to be democratic, because it tried how it was when it was a dictatorship. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for all the interventions. Sorry, my name is Haidar Saeed from the Arab Center. I have a remark regarding, or actually 2 remarks on the paper of Professor Liqa, and I do believe there are a lot of details that were presented. However, my 2 remarks are the following. First, I doubt that there might be a unified vision, Gulf vision towards Iraq. And of course, there are a lot of details. Iraq witnessed a lot of changes, especially after a certain period of time, after the year 2003. So first, the fear by Saudi Arabia was that the reform idea will affect the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So there was kind of an opposition, in addition to other things also as well. And what concerns Qatar and Oman, of course, they did not have these fears. So the main idea that I want to talk about is that since the year 2003, there were three Gulf countries that were within a coalition, and it had a Sunni Arab identity. So in order to understand the position of the GCC countries, we need to understand who are these countries: Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Turkey, Jordan, and maybe Egypt also. So in order to understand the position of the Gulf countries, it's very important to look at all of these countries. And I also documented how this club of six was really controlling all the decisions and all the resolutions that were taken. So especially in the year 2010. So the transformation happened in the year 2014 with Daesh. So at the end of the reign of King Abdullah bin Abdul Aziz, Saudi vision was being established, and it focused on the necessity of supporting Iraq, and this led to a number of changes. So it's like we need to support the Shia and not the Sunni in this framework. And of course, the soft power was being thought of to be used in Iraq, and this leads us to talk about something essential. How can we differentiate between who might be opposing Iran and who might be supporting Iran? It's very important to talk about Qatar as well. So this is a statement of one of the high officials in Qatar, especially after the blockade, that we need Iraq to be a regional force facing the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. So this is what they were seeking to do. Thank you very much.
Dr. Abdullah Al-Shaiji. Thank you. Thank you for the great three presentations. But I have a few remarks or questions. My first question is to Dr. Mohammed Misfer. You have a very pessimistic view. I think you should have applied the alliance theory on the GCC country, because it's true that we have an inefficient GCC because of a number of reasons, but we should also know that in nature the alliances do not always require one perception. This is not to mention the fact that the GCC is weak from a security perspective. The GCC was established to unify forces, and eventually it failed at the deterrence and the prevention levels, and it did not bring any added value to any of the GCC countries, and that's why the GCC failed in protection. And you have explained this. Of course, there are a number of theories or scenarios for the future. In my book, I have identified 4 scenarios for the future of the Council, and I believe the GCC could turn into a Maghreb-like council, a council without a soul or a spirit, but the body will continue to exist. And I think there is a hope to reactivate the Council, and I'm not sure why you are so pessimistic. Regarding Professors Liqa and Ali, your presentations are very enriching. Dr. Liqa, I'm not sure if you were aware of what happened on 17 November. The Intercept ensured a treasure of information about the Iranian intelligence ministry, and the intelligence apparatus of the revolution regards. An Iraqi sent this trove of information, and it was translated into Arabic and published by the New York Times. This trove of information shows the full and the absolute control exercised by Iran. It shows how Iran is fully perpetrated into the regime and how all of its allies are rising to power. So it's very important to check this trove of information. More importantly, the street protests in Lebanon and Iraq. Does Iran have a role in these protests? What about the Shia crescent? Is Iran's project receding in both countries? And is a partitioned Iraq one of the likely scenarios? And according to latest information, Iran doesn't want a partitioned Iraq. One last question. Is there a Gulf position? Even during the Saddam Hussein era, 4 Gulf countries reopened their embassies, and we tend to overlook this fact. Also, what is the future of Yemen? Is it a divided or a united Yemen? Of course, the Gulf countries, again, do not have a united perception on this. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank all the questions. I have one comment, actually. Abdullah Al-Ajmi from the University of Kuwait. There is a very important point that affects the Gulf security, and I believe that you did not focus on it. You overlooked the image of Iran from a Shia prism in the region. So what's currently happening in Iraq, i.e. the Shia protest against Iran in Iraq, and the street protests in Lebanon, the street protests in Iran, all of these protests are very important. For years, Iran was trying to create a Shia sentiment in favor of it, and Iran was trying to say that it will continue to support and will bestow on its supporters justice and Islamic values and good and other benefits. This was the case in Iraq, but now here we are, we see the Shia rebelling against this settlement, looking for justice. So I believe that you have overlooked this important variable. This variable is important for the Gulf security. For years, the Gulf system was unable to convince the Shia individuals of this, that they will find security in the Islamic revolution. So I will give the floor now to the speakers before we open a new round of questions and answers. Please be brief. Dr. Mohammed, go ahead. Mr. Abdullah, I know that you were referring to Qatar. Yes, Qatar is the 6th country, but in my overview of regional developments in the region at large, I could not see any Qatari position that could be equal to any position of the UAE or Kuwait or other countries. In my opinion, I did not see, I did not sense, I did not feel that Qatar has taken any initiative or any step forward, has not taken any action in arresting individuals or excluding some segments of society, as happened in Bahrain and in other GCC countries. So again, Qatar is the 6th country. What is the alternative to the GCC? Dr. Shaizi, yes, it's true. In your book, you identified 6 or 5 or 4 potential scenarios. I don't know, but one of these potential scenarios include bilateral coordination, and this is a new risk. I have already mentioned, the UAE established coordination bilateral relations with Saudi Arabia. 40 meetings have been held to date. In addition, Bahrain joined this mechanism. So coordination is ongoing beyond the GCC framework. And I would like to recall the W Trade Organization issue. Bahrain joined WTO alongside Oman. When this happened, Saudi Arabia cried foul. And the FTA is another agreement, and Saudi Arabia said that these two countries cannot depart from the GCC consensus, but eventually they had to accept this. So coordination is the alternative. Does the GCC have a future? In the under the current circumstances, and given the ongoing competition, and given the persistent arrogance of GCC leaders, I do not think that the GCC will have a future under the current circumstances. The circumstances could change, and we now have only two wise officials left, Sheikh Sabah and Sultan Qaboos. The rest is the new generation, and the generation are fed on arrogance and jealousy. Thank you. Mr. Liqa, you can answer the questions posed to you. Microphone. Mic, please.
مشكلة مجلس التعاون. طبعا هناك كلام كثير.
Of course, many questions were asked, and all of these questions are important. I realize that Iraq is a crucial issue. Dr. Abdullah mentioned the national persona or personality. I believe this is reflected in the nature of protests. In Lebanon, one person was killed, but in Iraq, tens of thousands have lost their lives. There are 21,000 injured, and more than 400 people have been killed. This is the announced death toll. Also, the protesters are courage and bold. They are braving death, and they are bold. You can see them on TVs. They are barefoot, but they are strong. And this phenomenon has taken us aback. It took us all by surprise. You asked a question about Israel. In my opinion, I cannot address this. Actually, we are talking. There is any communications aspect. Actually, I do not have a detailed information about the role of Israel. But in my opinion, Israel could be behind all our Arab problems. Therefore, I do not rule out a direct Israeli role in all crises, including the invasion of Iraq. A democratic Iraq. The alternative to a democratic and stable Iraq under current circumstances is chaos, total outright chaos. That would be worse than what happened in during the war. For Iran, Iraq is the last defense line. And therefore, Iran will not compromise and will not abandon the cause of Iraq. It's not easy to expel Iran out of Iraq. Iran, as a last resort, could try to ignite chaos and wreak havoc. Havoc is Iran's last resort to maintain its influence. If stability is not checked, as Dr. Shaiji said, then the alternative for Iran would be to wreak havoc through weapons and maximum violence, explosions, injuries, and so on. And it would push all parties, particularly the tribes, to take up arms. This almost happened in Nasiriyah and Najaf. So chaos remains an option, but outright chaos in Iraq with direct management, is it better for the Gulf countries than democracy or stability? The choice is yours. It's up to you to choose a democratic or a chaotic Iraq. Dr. Haidari, I will not comment on what you've said. What you've said is right and accurate, and I agree with you. You may have your own studies and research, but I would like to mention that there were two types of Sunnis before Daesh. First, the Sunni resistance, and this did not get any form of Gulf support. It was met with Gulf resistance because it concurred with the US occupation. And I agree with you on the Sunni political process. Jointly with Turkey, they wanted to establish a Sunni political process because the Sunnis were left behind, and therefore they wanted to engage the Sunnis in the political process, and this happened with the assistance of the US. The US pushed some Sunnis to participate in the political process to maintain stability, so they were trying in this way to pull the rug from under the feet of the resistance that claimed to protect and defend the Sunnis, and that's why this had the Gulf support. You also mentioned Ankara's project. Several meetings were held with Jordan and with Turkey and the GCC in order to support the Sunnis. This also failed because this was beyond the Sunni issue. Iran took everything, and there's no such thing now as Sunni or Shia left. The soft Saudi power. I will not comment on this question. Actually, Dr. Shaiji, you mentioned the partition of Iraq, and this is a very important issue. It's true that Iran does not want a partitioned Iraq. It's not because Iran loves Iraq. Iran doesn't want this because this will lead to Iran's partition. This is a domino effect, and this partition could also lead to a partition of Turkey and Iran. And that's why they insist on a united Iraq. Iran rejects any form of partition, and that's why the Kurdistan referendum was rejected. Who wants the partition of Iraq? The partition of Iraq could be a potential solution for the Gulf. But the question is, who will control Basra and Nasiriyah and this part of Iraq? So this could be possible through relations, and they could accommodate the oil of Iraq. But this was previously tested in Basra after the invasion, and after the occupation there was an attempt to establish a Basra province. Actually, this province was rejected. They also wanted a South province. Al-Hakim wanted so, including 9 provinces. They abandoned this project after they controlled all of Iraq. So Al-Maliki also refused to have a province of Al-Anbar, so because they wanted a central state. So a partition could not happen, and we could see a central Iraq or an autonomous, self-autonomous position for provinces. Also, the international community rejects the partition of Iraq, and the partition is not in the hands of the Gulf countries. The partition division of Iraq is rejected internationally, and it could be difficult under current circumstances. Dr. Al-Ajmi, you asked me about the Shia prism. This Shia prism could be a sectarian. To be able to grasp what's happening, you should shy away from all the stereotypes that the Shia are agents or spies of Iran. Actually, you should go away. You should not look at this issue from the stereotype. National identity is more important than sectarian unity. The Shia Iraq, the Shia people of Iraq are more in favor of their national pan-Arab identity. This is the case, and I will give you a popular example. For the Shia, they support Iran, but not at the expense of their national identity and unity. And all Arabs and tribes are aware of this. Why is it the case? Because they are patriotic. Because the Arabs are patriotic against Iran, and this is very obvious in Iraq. And this is can be traced back to years ago. There is a feeling that of patriotism. This is not the case, for instance, in Bahrain, but it is the case for the Shia of Iraq. That's why the revolution is a true revolution. Therefore, if anything happens to Iraq or Baghdad, they would say this is Iran's fault. So this is a stereotype that's similar to the discrimination that the black faced in the US. Iran is an evil component, and I believe this could be a good news to everyone. Thank you, everyone. Dr. Ali. You asked a question about the partition of Yemen. Actually, the strongest voice today is for division or partition into the north or the south, i.e. to a pre-12 May 19 situation where there was one part of Yemen allied with the Soviet Union and another that's allied with another party. Separation is not on the table because the Saudi-led coalition does not want partition. Saudi Arabia does not have an interest in a divided Yemen because this will open the door to further partition across the region. In addition, Saudi Arabia has interest in the south and it does not want to put all its eggs in one basket, and therefore Saudi Arabia controls Hadramaut and Al-Mahra. It also has a presence in Aden. Therefore, a partition into a north and a south is the likeliest, but it is rejected by the external parties and also by domestic players. Also, domestically, Abdul Rabbi Mansour Hadi is from the south, from Abyan, and these are there are Bedouin tribes. In August, he tried with his army to reach 10 kilometers away from the center of Aden. So, with the Maghreb supported forces and his army, was able to reach that point. So in the near future, a division of Yemen into the north and the south is not a likely option and will not materialize anytime soon. But the country could be divided into areas or provinces, and this could be an outcome of the national dialogue, and there is a talk about 6 such provinces. Thank you. Another round of questions. I have a question to Dr. Liqa. Of course, you raised a very important issue about the structure of the Iraqi system, and you said that Iraq is similar to Lebanon. Of course, the region has not witnessed such revolutions before. In my opinion, there could be an option similar to the option for Syria. There could be a counter-revolution or to counter Iran. And I believe that this option could not be supported by Saudi Arabia and the UAE. For Iraq, Saudi Arabia and the UAE could opt for a different option. I'm not sure if you have any comments on this.
We need to hear some ladies, please. Yes. Introduce yourself, please.
Thank you. Thank you for your help. So I have, I think I have two. The first is is about Yemen and the Arab coalition, and so you pointed out in your presentation the maritime assets, coastal assets that Yemen presents, and in particular for the Emiratis. And we see that although there's been withdrawal around those particular coastal ports and points, that those strategic assets have been maintained. Now, notwithstanding that we're talking about Gulf security, one part of that changing environment, and as a result of changes over the last 2 to 3 years, has been the importance of those assets in relation to the Horn of Africa and the growing rivalry between Gulf states and the implications for more widely for Gulf security. So I'd like your opinion on that, because it doesn't look like the Emirates are going to actually leave those points, even if, God willing, there's peace in Yemen. Secondly, just more broadly on the Arab coalition, I think that there's, as you highlighted, you were very polite in the ways in which you highlighted it, but putting it more bluntly, the Arab coalition has been an unmitigated disaster in terms of Gulf security. Now, taking that into consideration at a time when other external actors, more specifically the United States, is trying to build new security alliances, what does this unmitigated disaster tell us, or what does it predict for us in terms of the attempt, for example, by the US to form the Middle East Security Alliance? Thank you.
Thank you. Please introduce yourself as well.
Yes, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Wafa and I'm a graduate student at the Gulf Studies program in Qatar University. My question is to Dr. Mohammed Al-Misfer. So from what we have seen and known about India's relations with Gulf is India has for long played a strategic balancing act, trying to be more like a friend of all approach in the region. And we've also seen India's responses to Gulf crisis over the period. So it's interesting that in your paper you've just drawn parallels with the Singapore case. While we know that there are differences in this case, one of them that could be that Saudi Arabia is the largest arms importer in this decade. So any sort of uprising, it can crush instantly. So what makes you actually say that the Indian diaspora is a possible internal security challenge in your paper?
Thank you. That's
Microphone. With respect to tension in the region and regional concerns, the Islamic Revolution of 1979 has shaken the Gulf, and we all know that the Gulf countries were afraid, but we know that to date Oman was not intimidated, and Oman had a different situation than other GCC countries. So why has this been the case, and why wasn't Oman shaken or intimidated like other GCC countries by the Islamic Revolution? So this is your question to the chair. So this is an open question to all. I have another question. One speaker said that Iran has offered Iraq to the US, but I lived several years abroad and I know what's happening, and I believe that it's the US that has offered Iraq as a gift to Iran. I have one last point to make. With respect to Sudan, I would like to reassure you, Sudan is not the Sudan of Bashir. Sudan has we know that 10,000 have left, and there might be more coming from Sudan. Thank you. I have comments to Dr. Mohammed Al-Misfer. I'm from Kuwait. Since 1982, you have been saying that there's no future for the GCC, but now the GCC has been here for 40 years. I also want to emphasize the fact that you said that they do not have a combat ideology. Actually, a combat ideology is about how you combat on the ground. They did not fight together, and we cannot say that they have failed on this, actually. Also, you said you described the US Army, and all of President Trump's focus was on blackmail. He had agreements on education, on training, exchange of intelligence information, choice of targets, and so in return for this money, there was some form of cooperation. So how can you describe what happened in the way you've described it? Thank you, Mr. Chair. Akram Karimov from the Embassy of Tajikistan. I have a question to Mr. Liqa Makki. You mentioned in your presentation that Iraq is now beyond the sectarian issue. Given the current developments in Iraq, given the current protests in Iraq, what are the options in your opinion, and what are the options available to external players who are igniting the sectarian chord in Iraq, and what future steps would be taken to preserve their interests in Iraq? I also have a follow-up question. We hear a lot about the Shia Crescent project. Is this a project in place? And given current developments in Iraq, can we say that this project will not materialize and there will be a demise of the Crescent project? Dr. Walid from the Police Academy in Qatar. I'm specialized in security crisis management. I'm a former police officer and I have expertise in this respect. For us, the crisis had a simple triangle: weak capabilities, weak information, and surprise also. Intelligence includes analysis and international relations, and we always try to identify on the ground what are the facts, especially when we try to analyze scenarios. And Dr. Ali Dhahab, you have provided us with some excellent scenarios. So we have the worst scenario and the best case scenario. You have identified the best case scenario, which is a dead end, a political dead end in the Gulf countries. This is the current state of affairs. We have the war realities on the ground. There is an arms race, and on the other hand, there are human resources. You mentioned demographics extensively. You mentioned the demographic aspect in the Gulf countries, but now I'm talking about the military component in each. All of these are foreign forces. And also the combat ideology, like these forces are working for their money, in return for money, for their salary, and I don't think they have a combat ideology. Do you think that these armies have a ideology? They don't have one, because they are here for their salary and for their wages. So what is the scenario if a war breaks out? Will the Gulf turn into another Bosnia while the whole world plays a bystander role? Will there be a NATO intervention? Will there be a Security Council intervention? Do you think that in Yemen, do you think there is a polarization? There is polarization. There is a war of attrition. This is beyond dispute. In the current circumstances, you need depth. And when you elaborate a strategy, you need to focus on the strategic depth. What will happen? Will Iran play a greater role, or will there be another involvement? So I'm asking you about the vision and what will happen.
Thank you very much, Salam Al-Nasser. I have three questions to each of the speakers. My first question is addressed to Mr. Al-Misfer. The GCC, in its name, is a cooperation council. It is not a federation. The European Union maybe might have changed its name different times in order to progress, and therefore the GCC Council developed And like some say we are not a market for the economy to play a certain role. However, the GCC Council did not set a market. Of course, you talked about something that is important. You talked about the army. You talked about the military federation. So until today, the European Union did not reach and was able to create a federation. Please, if you do not ask the question, we should stop here. You said that you have 3 questions, and until today, until now, you still haven't asked any question. I give you 1 minute. Sorry. So there is a current program in the region in order to develop the nuclear energy. And a couple of weeks ago, I was attending another meeting, and we were talking about the development of nuclear energy, and the United Nations talked about the nuclear disarmament in the region. Do you think that it would be better to expand the nuclear energy, or to just leave it away? Now my question to address Zaki. You talked about the Iranian influence, but there are also Turkish risks. How do you look at the Turkish behavior in the region? Since 2015, Turkey is asking to intervene. And lastly, you said that there was no effort to try to return the Yemeni army. So why was this point neglected? Thank you very much. We took time from lunch. Please, each one of you has only 1.5 minutes to answer the questions. Regarding the coalition failed in achieving its objectives, its military, economic, and political objectives in the management of Yemen. The Saudi military force is weak. But it is a force that has a strong budget. It has developed arms. However, it cannot use any parts of this power because it failed in really facing the Houthis in the south. And the doctrine of the coalition started focusing on how to divide the geography of Yemen. India is a force, is a power. It has 1 billion, around 1 billion people, and there's a very big number of them to be found here in the Gulf. It is also a nuclear military power that is able to do different things. And this is how things work. When in each year at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of India, a conference for migrants and expats is held in the Gulf, and lately it was held in Bahrain. So this is not something bad, of course, but what's bad is for us, the people from the Gulf, who might not understand this position. What about Oman? Oman does not have a problem with Iran, and it is known that it protected the Iranian regime at the beginning of the 1970s. And this is something that is recognized by everyone at all levels. Dr. Dhafar said that I said that there is no doctrine. This is not what I said. They failed in what concerns the doctrine. They do not even have a doctrine. So the Gulf Army failed in facing Iran, in facing Iraq, in facing any other power. They had recourse to existent foreign forces, more than 20,000 American soldiers holding weapons, in addition to carriers. the American army rents itself. So now the American army is rented, or they were paying for the American army, we're renting the American army to protect the region. And they pay billions of dollars in order for the army to protect the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. I think that you answered all questions. And if there are any other things you would like to add, please do so during the break. Kindly use the microphone. The counter-revolution in Iraq, as I said, is difficult because the situation is different. There is no head of regime in order to be in order to have a structural force, a structural power, especially that the regime is new. So between the different parties, there are different interests inside the Shia confession, the Sunni confession, between the Shia and others. So it's very difficult for all of them to unify on one vision. Because they witnessed a lot of bloody events. Regarding the Syrian scenario, I think that Syria is different from Iraq. There are geographic and demographic reasons, many reasons that are linked to the Syrian situation and that are different from the Iraqi situation. Regarding Mr. Akram, in fact, there are main parties participating in Iraq: the US, Iran, Turkey, the Gulf, but each at a different level of force, power, and interests. I think that many countries want to intervene, and that's why President Erdogan called Abdul Mahdi and is asking for stability. And I think that Iran is among the countries that is really witnessing a lot of damages. The US is encouraging this process because it will produce something that is in its interest. And the Gulf countries, I do not think that they have lots of choices available. And regarding the Shia aggression, 3 months ago, there was a US withdrawal, especially after the attack on Aramco, and it seemed as if Iran will be witnessing a certain situation for 50 more years, and that the crescent turned into a full moon with the presence of the Houthis. However, what happened during these last 2 months changed the vision. There's no more crescent. The full moon is starting to be destroyed. The Iranian interests are facing lots of difficulties. However, the war is still ongoing. What about the Turkish performance? I think that you are talking about Lausanne. The equation of Lausanne does not englobe anything that is related to Mosul. This is something that was settled. But the Turks have important interests, especially in Syria, and their relation to Iraq is linked to the Labour Party that is to be found in Sinjar with the protection of Iran. And the objective is for them to continue being present to annoy Turkey. And they have also other interests related to the Kurds. So they did not use bloodshed, and this is different from what happens with Iran, and therefore its refutal was not on the same level as that of Iran, and Turkey has interests in Syria more than in Iraq, and this is clear through their military intervention. Mr. Mohammed has one thing to add regarding the nuclear armament of the Gulf. I am with this armament because we live in a lake of nuclear armament. Pakistan, India, Israel, Iran are all seeking to reach this armament, and in the past sessions we talked a lot about this problem. You could go back to past sessions. Now, concerning the UAE and its power, of course, the United Arab Emirates dealt with the Yemeni government in the year 2018 in order to rent the port of Aden, and this was something that was blatantly against Yemen. After the revolution of the year 2011, the Minister of Transport asked to renew this convention or to just abort it, and in the end it was aborted, and the UAE started intervening in Yemen based on the aforementioned in order to link its interests to that. The second point is related to the American interests. It is a militarization of certain areas, and the region should be far away from the existence of new alliances, because there is an agreement and a conventions that is a code of conduct of the year 2009 in order to face privacy, and then it was developed in order to face all forms of organized crime through national borders, and I think that we should be far away from these new coalitions. Regarding the last question that was raised by the colleague from Spain, of course, there is no trust from the coalition, because when you give your ally an aerial force, it means that you lost your aerial sovereignty. The coalition now is controlling that, and it wants at the same time create a balance between the different parties of the legitimate authority in order for it to be a partner on all levels. Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, participants. Thank you, speakers. Sorry we weren't able to listen to all questions. The last session will start at 2 because we took more time than expected now. So we'll start the last session at 2 in this hall.